The particular scent, that cloying fusion of antiseptic, overly sweet air fresheners, and something indefinably aged, still haunts my nightmares. It's the ghost fragrance of Silver Willows, the self-proclaimed elite assisted living facility. 3 years ago, my only son, my Kevin, brought me there for just a tour, convincing me it was a resort-like haven where I could finally rest. I, Abigail, Abby Harrington, didn't know then that this resort would become my prison, and my beloved son, my jailer, acting under the shrewd direction of his calculating wife Tiffany. But they underestimated the old fox. They forgot I'd spent 40 years dissecting complex financial fraud for the IRS. And they certainly never anticipated I would turn their perfectly orchestrated rest cure into their personal financial and marital apocalypse. Before I plunge you into the labyrinthine tale of my recent odyssey, of how I not only escaped that gilded cage, but also reclaimed everything stolen from me and then some, do let me know where you're tuning in from around the globe. And if stories of unexpected resilience, of a steely will hidden beneath a veneer of frailty, strike a chord with your soul, make sure you're subscribed. In our next installment, I'll be sharing the delicious secret of how one inconspicuous clause in a prenuptial agreement can become the master key to freedom, or to utter ruin. Now, let us return to that sun-drenched June afternoon, a day that, for me, heralded a long and chilling twilight. Kevin was the epitome of solicitous charm as he helped me from his gleaming SUV at the grand entrance of Silver Willows. "Mom, just look at this place. Isn't it beautiful?" he chirped, gesturing towards the meticulously manicured lawns and the elegant colonial-style building. "Tiffany found it. Says it's got the best care in the state. We're just looking, okay? No pressure at all." Beside him, impeccably polished as always, stood Tiffany. Her platinum blonde hair lay in a perfect, expensive wave on her shoulders, and a sympathetic smile played on her lips, a smile that never quite reached her cold, assessing blue eyes. "Abby, darling, we've been so worried about you," she cooed, her perfectly manicured hand lightly touching my arm. "After that fall last week? We just want to be sure you're safe and getting all the help you need." "The fall? What fall?" "Oh, yes. I'd tripped over the edge of the rug in my own living room. Bruised my knee a little, nothing more. A minor stumble that, in their dramatic retelling, had morphed into irrefutable proof of my complete decrepitude. I was 75, yes, but I still played bridge twice a week with the girls, drove my own Buick, and managed my not inconsiderable investment portfolio with a sharp mind. In their eyes, however, I was already a frail old woman, teetering on the brink, desperately in need of round-the-clock supervision. The narrative they were spinning was as transparent as Tiffany's feigned concern. I allowed them to escort me inside. The lobby of Silver Willows was indeed impressive. Gleaming marble floors, plush sofas in muted good taste, and enormous arrangements of fresh flowers that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. We were greeted by the facility administrator, a Miss Perkins, a woman with a smile as rigidly fixed as her lacquered hairdo and eyes that seemed to X-ray my bank account. She immediately launched into a gushing litany of the establishment's manifold delights: a heated indoor pool, senior yoga classes, gourmet meals prepared by an in-house chef, even a small cinema. Kevin nodded with an air of profound enthusiasm, while Tiffany emitted little gasps of feigned delight. I remained silent, a cold knot of foreboding tightening in my chest. This felt less like a tour, and more like a carefully staged appraisal. We were shown to a demonstration suite, a bright, spacious room with a large picture window overlooking a charming, albeit sterile, courtyard, complete with a burbling fountain. "This is one of our premium suites, Mrs. Harrington," Miss Perkins announced with a proprietary air, very popular with our more discerning residents. "Mom, what do you think?" Kevin asked, his voice practically dripping with false solicitude. "Isn't it wonderful? Imagine, no more cooking, no cleaning, just relaxation and activities." His gaze flickered towards Tiffany, a quick, almost imperceptible exchange that I didn't miss. "We thought perhaps you could stay for a couple of weeks, Abby, just to recuperate fully, get settled in," Tiffany chimed in, fluttering her eyelashes with an innocence that was almost insulting. "Get a real taste of the good life here." At that precise moment, I genuinely wasn't feeling my best. I'd taken a new blood pressure medication that morning, prescribed by my regular doctor, and it was making me slightly dizzy, a little disoriented. The thought of arguing, of making a scene, of trying to assert my perfectly sound mind and body in this alien, antiseptic environment, felt overwhelming. So, I said, rather neutrally, "It looks very comfortable." I reasoned that if they were so insistent, perhaps a week or two of respite care, as they called it, might appease them. Then I could return to my own home, my own life. How tragically naive I was. "Wonderful." Kevin beamed, his relief so palpable it was almost comical. He looked like a man who'd just successfully defused a bomb. "Then, if you don't mind, Mom, we'll just leave your overnight bag here, and Tiffany and I will pop back to your house and pack a few more things for a longer stay. Miss Perkins said all the admission paperwork can be handled a little later, no rush." "Overnight bag? What overnight bag?" I only had my handbag with me. But before I could voice my confusion, Tiffany, with a swiftness that belied her delicate appearance, had produced a clipboard and a pen. "Abby, darling, this is just a standard temporary guest registration and a consent form for preliminary medical observation. Nothing serious, just a formality. If you could just sign here and here, it will allow the staff to look after you properly until we get back with your things." The dizziness was more pronounced now. The lines of text on the page seemed to blur and swim before my eyes. I could make out phrases like, consent for routine medical assessment, temporary residency agreement, emergency contact information. I, who had spent a lifetime scrutinizing fine print for the IRS, was now being asked to sign documents I could barely focus on. But what harm could there be in a temporary registration, a consent for observation while they fetched my belongings? My guard, unfortunately, was down, lulled by physical discomfort and their relentless performance of filial concern. "All right," I murmured, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. And I scribbled my signature in the indicated places, a hasty, unsteady scrawl, a monumental error, a catastrophic lapse in my usually rigorous judgment. They left, promising to return in a couple of hours, leaving me in the care of the ever-smiling Miss Perkins. She offered me a cup of tea, which I declined. Something about its overly fragrant aroma, and the glint in her eye as she offered it, set off a faint alarm bell. Instead, I lay down on the surprisingly comfortable bed in the demonstration suite, deciding that a short nap might clear the lingering dizziness from the new medication. I awoke with a jolt, a hand gently but firmly shaking my shoulder. A nurse in a crisp white uniform, her name tag identifying her as Nancy, stood over me. "Mrs. Harrington, it's time for your evening medication," she announced, her voice cheerful but with an underlying note of no-nonsense efficiency. "Evening?" I glanced at the discreet digital clock on the wall. 6:30. I'd slept for several hours. And Kevin and Tiffany hadn't returned. My overnight bag, the one they were supposedly fetching, was nowhere in sight. "Where is my son?" I asked, pushing myself up in bed. The dizziness had largely subsided, replaced by a sharp, insistent thrum of anxiety. "Your son and his wife called, Mrs. Harrington," Nancy replied, holding out a small paper cup containing a collection of pills. They send their deepest apologies, but they were unexpectedly delayed by some urgent business. They asked me to tell you they'll be here first thing in the morning. And these are your prescribed medications, as per Dr. Anderson's orders. Dr. Anderson? I didn't know any Dr. Anderson. My physician was Dr. Albright, a woman I'd been seeing for 15 years. I'm not taking those, I stated firmly. And I want to call my son. Now. Nancy's cheerful smile wavered, becoming a little more fixed. I'm afraid that won't be possible right now, Mrs. Harrington. We have a strict schedule here. And telephone calls are not permitted for new residents after 6 p.m. to help with their initial adjustment period. Please take your medication. It will help you relax and get a good night's sleep. Relax. My anxiety was rapidly escalating into full-blown panic. I am not a new resident, I exclaimed, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. I am here temporarily. My son is coming back for me tonight. Nancy sighed, a practiced, weary sound. A flicker of something that might have been pity, or perhaps just professional boredom, crossed her face. Mrs. Harrington, according to the admission documents signed by your son, and with your own signed consent, you are now a permanent resident of Silver Willows, under our full medical and custodial care. You can see for yourself. She extended a sleek, leather-bound folder towards me. I snatched it, my hands trembling. The first page was a lengthy, jargon-filled document. Agreement for long-term residential care and comprehensive medical services. And there, at the bottom of the last page, was my signature. Or rather, a signature that was a disturbingly accurate facsimile of my own. For a horrifying moment, I almost believed I had signed it, in my drugged, disoriented state. Had they switched the papers Tiffany had given me? Or had I been so out of it that I'd signed my life away without a second glance? The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I stared at Nancy, at the tastefully bland walls of the room that had suddenly transformed from a pleasant suite into a luxurious prison cell. But, this is a mistake, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. My son, Kevin, he wouldn't. He couldn't. Your son is very concerned about your well-being, Mrs. Harrington, Nancy repeated, her voice gentle but unyielding, like a velvet-covered vice. He simply wants to ensure you are safe and well cared for. Now, please, your medication. The full, horrifying truth crashed down on me then, with the force of a physical blow. It was a trap. A meticulously planned, ruthlessly executed trap. My own son, my Kevin, egged on by that avaricious harpy Tiffany, had committed me. Dumped me here like a piece of unwanted furniture, to gain unfettered access to my house, my investments, my entire estate. And those standard forms I'd so carelessly signed, perhaps aided by whatever was in that first cup of tea I'd foolishly accepted from Miss Perkins upon arrival, or by the side effects of my new legitimate medication, had been the key to locking me away. A different kind of medication was now being offered. One clearly designed to keep me docile, compliant. Fury, cold and diamond-hard, began to smolder deep within me, burning away the fear, the confusion, the crippling sense of betrayal. They thought I would break? That I would meekly accept the role of a helpless, senile old woman, fading away in their gilded cage? Oh, how wrong they were! They had forgotten who they were dealing with? I was Abigail Harrington. I had faced down corporate sharks and tax-evading millionaires. And my game was only just beginning. The immediate priority was to avoid their medication. When Nancy momentarily turned her back to adjust the blinds, I palmed the pills, then pretended to swallow them with the water she offered. As soon as she left the room, her sensible shoes squeaking officiously on the polished floor, I spat the offending tablets into a tissue and flushed them down the toilet. I needed a clear head, every faculty sharp and focused. My room, I quickly discovered, was indeed a comfortable prison. The door, while not locked from the inside with a key, had a mechanism that only staff could operate from the corridor to fully secure it. The large window, as I'd suspected, had restrictors that allowed it to open only a tantalizing few inches. For your safety, dear, as Miss Perkins had cloyingly explained during the initial tour. The telephone on the bedside table was a direct line to the nurse's station, nothing more. My personal cell phone, I realized with a fresh wave of anger, was missing from my handbag. Kevin or Tiffany must have removed it when I wasn't looking, or perhaps during my unnaturally deep sleep. Isolation, that was their strategy. Cut me off from the outside world, medicate me into a stupor, and wait for me to either accept my fate or deteriorate to the point where their claims of my incompetence would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The next few days were a masterclass in feigned compliance. I ate the bland, albeit well-prepared food, after surreptitiously checking for any powdery residue. I attended the mind-numbingly dull reminiscence therapy sessions, offering vague, harmless anecdotes from a carefully edited version of my past. I even allowed the activities coordinator, a relentlessly cheerful young woman named Brittany, to guide my hand in creating a lopsided clay pot that looked more like a deflated football. I smiled weakly, nodded often, and appeared to be sinking into a gentle, befuddled decline. Inside, however, my mind was a whirlwind of activity. I was observing, cataloging, analyzing. The staff routines, the shift changes, the layout of the facility. The other residents, some genuinely frail, others like me perhaps, with a spark of defiance still flickering in their eyes. I paid particular attention to the security measures. The cameras in the hallways, though thankfully not in the private rooms, the coded keypads on certain doors, the way the night staff seemed more lax, more prone to congregating at the nurse's station for coffee and gossip. Kevin and Tiffany visited on the third day, their faces models of concerned filial piety. "Mom, you look so much more rested," Kevin said, taking my hand. His felt clammy. "Dr. Anderson, that phantom physician again, is very pleased with your progress. He says the structured environment here is doing wonders for you." "Yes, Abby. You seem much calmer," Tiffany chimed in, her eyes, however, darting around the room, assessing its contents, or lack thereof. No doubt she was already mentally redecorating my house. I offered them a watery smile. "It's very peaceful here, dears, and the staff are so kind." I let my voice tremble slightly. "It's just, I do worry about things at home, the bills, my investments. It's all such a muddle in my head these days." This was a carefully planted seed. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about any of that, Mom," Kevin said, a little too quickly. "Tiffany and I will take care of everything. You just focus on getting better." "But it would make me feel so much more at ease, Kevin," I persisted, injecting a note of pathetic anxiety into my voice. If I could just give you power of attorney to manage my affairs, then I wouldn't have to fret. Miss Perkins said it's quite a common arrangement for residents here. She even knows a very discreet and efficient lawyer who could draw up the papers." I watched their faces. Kevin's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Tiffany's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. A flicker of triumphant greed passed between them, so quick I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. They thought I was capitulating, handing them the keys to the kingdom on a silver platter. This was easier than they could have possibly imagined. "Well, Mom, if it would truly make you feel better," Kevin began, trying to sound hesitant. "Oh, absolutely, Abby," Tiffany gushed. "That's a wonderful idea. It shows you're thinking so clearly about your future security." The bait was taken. Hook, line, and sinker. In the days that followed, I cultivated my image as a frail, slightly confused, but ultimately cooperative old lady. I made a point of befriending Lucy, a young, idealistic nursing aide who seemed genuinely kind. I'd share carefully selected harmless memories with her, sighing about how muddled my thoughts sometimes felt. I also observed Manuel, an older custodian, who always had a cheerful word and often hummed old Spanish love songs while he worked. He seemed to have a certain disdain for the more officious members of the staff. Potential allies, both of them, though they didn't know it yet. The preparations for granting power of attorney moved with surprising speed. Miss Perkins, all efficiency and smiles, arranged for her recommended lawyer, a Mr. Sneed, to visit. Sneed was a portly man with shifty eyes and a suit that looked a size too small, a caricature of a sleazy lawyer. I knew instantly he was in their pocket. The day Mr. Sneed arrived with the documents, Kevin and Tiffany were present, hovering like well-dressed vultures. Tiffany had even brought me a bouquet of funereal white lilies, which I detested, knowing full well my favorites were vibrant yellow roses, the color of sunshine and defiance. Mr. Sneed read through the power of attorney document in a dry monotone. It was a comprehensive, ironclad instrument, granting Kevin full and unrestricted control over all my assets, properties, and financial accounts. Exactly what they wanted. I listened patiently, nodding occasionally. When he finished, I took the pen he offered. Kevin and Tiffany held their breath. I could almost taste their anticipation. I touched the pen to the paper, then paused, a thoughtful frown creasing my brow. "You know, Mr. Sneed," I said, my voice quavering slightly, "as I'm signing this, it makes me think about my personal effects. My jewelry, the few family heirlooms I have stored at home, and the contents of my safe deposit box at the First National. It's not much, but I wouldn't want it all to just disappear into probate if something were to happen to me unexpectedly." I dabbed at my eyes with a lace-edged handkerchief I'd strategically placed in my sleeve. Kevin looked uneasy. "Mom, let's not talk about such morbid things now. This power of attorney is just to help manage things while you're resting." "Of course, dear," I said soothingly. "But one must be practical. I was thinking, perhaps a small codicil, or a separate letter of instruction, naming my grandniece Cynthia in Oregon as the beneficiary for those specific personal items. She's such a sweet girl, my late sister's only grandchild. It would mean so much to her." Cynthia, of course, was a figment of my imagination, a name plucked from an old novel, but the effect was instantaneous. Tiffany's eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. Jewelry, heirlooms, a safe deposit box. Her mind was clearly racing, calculating the potential value. She knew nothing of what was actually in my box, mostly sentimental papers, a few old war bonds of negligible value, and Frank's Purple Heart. But the idea of hidden treasures was irresistible to her. Mr. Sneed looked annoyed at the complication. "Well, Mrs. Harrington, that would require drafting an additional instrument, a testamentary disposition of sorts." "Oh, I'm sure it wouldn't take you long, a clever man like yourself," I simpered. "And I'd feel so much better signing the power of attorney knowing that these little sentimental matters are taken care of. We can do it right now, can't we? I have all the time in the world after all." They couldn't refuse without appearing grasping and callous. So, while Mr. Sneed reluctantly began to draft a document bequeathing non-existent heirlooms to a fictional relative, I signed the power of attorney, bestowing upon my son the control he so desperately craved, or so he thought. As they were leaving, high on their apparent victory, I dropped another carefully crafted crumb. "Kevin, dear," I said, my voice weak, "the key to the safe deposit box? It's in that little carved sandalwood box on my dresser at home. There's only one. You'll need it, of course, to check on things for me. The trap was set. The players were in position. Now, all I had to do was wait for my real lawyer, Arthur Jenkins, to receive the message I'd managed to convey through a chain of whispered requests to Lucy, who had then, bless her innocent heart, relayed it to a distant cousin of mine, Arthur's very capable paralegal, during one of her days off. The message was simple. Silver Willows. Code Nightingale. Urgent. Code Nightingale was a silly code word Frank and I had used years ago when we wanted to signal a real emergency without alarming the children. I prayed Arthur would remember. He did. 2 days later, Arthur Jenkins, looking every inch the distinguished, silver-haired legal lion he was, arrived at Silver Willows, announcing himself as my long-lost brother-in-law from out of state, deeply concerned about my sudden illness. Miss Perkins couldn't very well refuse a family visit. Our reunion was a masterpiece of feigned emotion. Tears, hugs, whispered reminiscences. And in those whispers, I conveyed the essentials. The suspicious medication, the coerced signature, the phantom Dr. Anderson, the power of attorney, and my suspicions about Sneed. Arthur, a man who could smell fraud from a mile away, understood immediately. The game was afoot, and I, Abigail Harrington, was no longer a pawn. I was the queen, and I was about to orchestrate a checkmate that would echo through their lives for years to come. The contents of that safe deposit box were far more explosive than Tiffany could ever imagine, but not in the way she hoped. Arthur Jenkins, bless his shrewd legal mind and unwavering loyalty, moved with the speed and precision of a seasoned general deploying his troops. My whispered, Code Nightingale, had been more than enough to galvanize him into action. While I continued my performance as the gently declining matriarch within the perfumed walls of Silver Willows, Arthur was a whirlwind on the outside. His first move was to discreetly investigate Dr. Anderson. It took his crackerjack legal team less than 24 hours to confirm what I already suspected. No physician by that name was credentialed to practice at Silver Willows, nor was there any record of him being affiliated with any reputable medical institution in the state. The prescriptions I was supposedly receiving were, at best, unauthorized and, at worst, part of a deliberate plan to keep me sedated and pliable. This information alone was a powerful piece of ammunition. Next, Arthur turned his attention to Mr. Sneed, the discreet and efficient lawyer recommended by Miss Perkins. A little digging into Sneed's professional history unearthed a rather unsavory pattern. A string of cases involving elderly clients who had, under questionable circumstances, signed over significant assets to younger relatives or caregivers, often shortly before a rapid decline in their health or a convenient diagnosis of dementia. Sneed, it appeared, specialized in facilitating the exploitation of the vulnerable. Another nail for their collective coffin. Meanwhile, I played my part to perfection. I expressed to Kevin and Tiffany, during their increasingly infrequent and brief visits, a growing anxiety about the contents of my safe deposit box. "I keep thinking about those old share certificates, dear," I'd say to Kevin, my voice laced with a manufactured confusion. "And Mama's pearls. Are they quite safe, do you think? Perhaps you should just retrieve them for safekeeping. You have the key now, after all." Tiffany's eyes would gleam. The thought of Mama's pearls, another fabrication, my mother had owned costume jewelry at best, and old share certificates, which were, in reality, mostly worthless stock from long-defunct companies Frank had optimistically invested in decades ago, was clearly irresistible. I knew her avarice. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist the allure of a treasure hunt, especially one where she believed she held all the maps and keys. The staff at Silver Willows, particularly Miss Perkins, began to treat me with a cloying solicitude that bordered on the suffocating. They were clearly under instructions from Kevin and Tiffany to ensure my comfort and prevent any agitation. My medication dosage was subtly increased, or so they thought. I became an expert at feigning ingestion, a skill honed by years of politely declining second helpings at tedious dinner parties. The little pills, meant to fog my mind, instead ended up nourishing the wilting potted fern in the corner of my room. That fern, ironically, had never looked healthier. My interactions with Lucy, the young nursing aide, became my lifeline. Under the guise of sharing rambling, confused anecdotes, I managed to pass her small, coded notes for Arthur. Details about the medication schedule, snippets of overheard conversations between staff members, descriptions of Miss Perkins's unusual nervousness whenever my case was mentioned. Lucy, bless her compassionate soul, believed she was humoring a lonely old woman. She had no idea she was a crucial operative in a meticulously planned counteroffensive. Manuel, the quiet custodian, also played an unwitting role. He often left the door to the service corridor slightly ajar when he was cleaning nearby rooms. Through that sliver of an opening, I could sometimes hear snatches of unfiltered staff gossip, complaints about management, and, most interestingly, hushed concerns about the recent influx of difficult families and questionable admission paperwork. Silver Willows, it seemed, was developing a reputation, and not a good one. The anticipation for Kevin and Tiffany's visit to my safe deposit box was almost unbearable. Arthur had arranged everything. He'd contacted the bank manager, a personal acquaintance, explained the situation in broad strokes: potential elder abuse, financial exploitation, and secured their cooperation. The bank was to allow Kevin and Tiffany access, observe their actions, and then, at a prearranged signal from Arthur, secure the box and its contents as potential evidence. The day finally arrived. Kevin called in the morning, his voice unnaturally cheerful. "Hi, Mom. Just wanted to let you know, Tiffany and I are going to pop by the bank this afternoon, just to check on those things for you. Make sure everything's in order." "Oh, that's wonderful, dear," I cooed. "You're such a good son. So thoughtful. And then we'll come see you. Bring you some of those cookies you like," he added. "The ones from the bakery near my old house," a transparent attempt at bribery. "That would be lovely, Kevin. I'll look forward to it." I could almost hear Tiffany in the background, urging him to get off the phone. The treasurer waited. Arthur had a contact inside the bank, a junior teller he'd once helped out of a minor legal scrape, who was to text him the moment Kevin and Tiffany entered the vault. The hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. I sat in my room, feigning interest in a game of bingo being called over the facility's intercom system, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm. Around 3 in the afternoon, my discreetly vibrating burner phone, a cheap, untraceable device Arthur had managed to smuggle in via Lucy, hidden inside a box of special diabetic chocolates, buzzed in my pocket. A single word from Arthur: showtime. I imagined the scene at the First National Bank. Kevin and Tiffany, radiating an air of smug importance, being escorted into the vault. The bank officer, polite but watchful, presenting them with box 473. Tiffany, barely able to contain her excitement, fumbling with the key I'd so obligingly told them about. The heavy steel door swinging open. And what would they find? Not glittering diamonds or stacks of bearer bonds. Instead, neatly arranged, were the following items: a notarized affidavit, prepared by Arthur and signed by me, my real signature, witnessed by Arthur's unimpeachable paralegal, detailing the circumstances of my admission to Silver Willows, including the suspected drugging, the coercive signing of documents, and the consistent denial of access to my own legal counsel and chosen physician. It named Kevin, Tiffany, Miss Perkins, and Mr. Sneed as co-conspirators in a scheme to defraud me of my assets and unlawfully deprive me of my liberty. A comprehensive medical report from my actual physician, Dr. Albright, dated just 1 week before my fall, attesting to my excellent cognitive health and full capacity to manage my own affairs. This report directly contradicted any claims Kevin and Tiffany might have made about my sudden mental decline. Copies of all my financial statements for the past 5 years, demonstrating a consistent and astute management of my portfolio, further refuting any notion of incompetence. A formal revocation of the power of attorney I had signed under duress, along with a demand for an immediate independent psychiatric evaluation to be conducted by a court-appointed specialist. A detailed log I had secretly kept during my time at Silver Willows, documenting every instance of suspicious medication, every denied request for outside contact, every manipulative conversation with Kevin, Tiffany, and Miss Perkins. My memory, honed by years of IRS audits, was impeccable when it came to details. And, as a final flourish, nestled amongst the legal documents, was a small framed photograph of Frank and me on our wedding day, young and full of hope. Beneath it, a handwritten note. "Remember who you are, Kevin," or, more importantly, "Remember who I am." I could only imagine the stunned disbelief, the dawning horror on their faces as they realized the extent of their miscalculation. The treasure they had sought was not gold, but a meticulously laid legal minefield. As per Arthur's plan, the moment they began to examine the contents, the bank manager, citing irregularities and potential security concerns, would politely inform them that the box was being temporarily sealed pending further investigation, and that they would need to discuss the matter with their legal counsel, and mine. The fallout, I knew, would be immediate and explosive. Back at Silver Willows, I waited. The bingo game droned on. Mrs. Peterson from room 212 triumphantly yelled, "Bingo!" for the 3rd time that afternoon, much to the annoyance of her table mates. I merely smiled serenely. My own game was reaching its far more satisfying conclusion. Around 5 o'clock, Miss Perkins herself appeared at my door, her usual ironclad smile looking decidedly brittle. "Mrs. Harrington," she began, her voice a little too bright, a little too forced. "Your son and his wife called. They've been unavoidably detained. They won't be able to visit this evening after all." "Oh, what a shame," I said, feigning disappointment. "I was so looking forward to those cookies." Miss Perkins's eye twitched. "Yes, well, perhaps another time." She hesitated, then added, "They also asked me to inquire if you were feeling quite yourself today, Mrs. Harrington. If there was anything at all you needed to discuss with them urgently." I beamed at her. "Why, no, Miss Perkins, I feel wonderful. Never better, in fact. Just looking forward to a quiet evening and a good night's sleep. Thanks to the excellent care here, of course." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I could see the gears turning in her head, the dawning suspicion that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong with their neat little plan. The next morning, Arthur Jenkins arrived, not as a concerned brother-in-law, but as Abigail Harrington's duly appointed legal representative, armed with court orders and a steely determination. He demanded my immediate release, citing unlawful confinement, medical malpractice, and conspiracy to defraud. He presented the evidence retrieved from the safe deposit box. He threatened lawsuits that would not only bankrupt Silver Willows, but also tarnish its elite reputation beyond repair. Miss Perkins's composure finally shattered. Faced with irrefutable proof and the prospect of a very public, very damaging legal battle, the administration of Silver Willows caved. The permanent residency agreement was declared null and void. All medical directives signed under duress were rescinded. Within hours, I walked out of Silver Willows, not on a gurney or leaning on a walker, but on my own 2 feet, head held high, with Arthur by my side. The scent of antiseptic and air freshener was replaced by the clean, crisp air of freedom. As I stepped into Arthur's waiting car, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Phase 1 was complete. But this was far from over. Kevin and Tiffany were still out there. They had tried to erase me, to steal my life. Now it was my turn to rewrite their future. And the next chapter, I knew, would involve unraveling the carefully constructed facade of their perfect marriage. Tiffany, my dear, ambitious daughter-in-law, was about to discover that hell hath no fury, like an elderly woman whose safe deposit box you've just tried to plunder. Especially when that box contains more than just old love letters. It contained the seeds of her spectacular downfall. The game of bridge I'd been playing in my head for weeks was about to get very, very interesting. And I held all the trump cards. The drive away from Silver Willows with Arthur was quiet, but it was a silence pregnant with unspoken triumphs and future strategies. The late afternoon sun, slanting through the car window, felt like a benediction on my newly reclaimed freedom. I leaned my head back against the plush leather seat, a profound weariness settling over me, yet beneath it, a steely current of resolve. This wasn't just about escaping, it was about justice. And for Tiffany, in particular, it was about a reckoning. "They're panicking, Abby," Arthur said, breaking the silence, his voice a low rumble of satisfaction. He'd just finished a call with his associate, who had been monitoring the initial fallout. Kevin is apparently a blubbering mess. Tiffany, on the other hand, is trying to brazen it out, threatening countersuits for defamation. Delusional, the pair of them. "Let her threaten," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "She'll find that bravado doesn't hold up well under oath, especially when confronted with certain visual aids." Arthur raised a questioning eyebrow. "All in good time, Arthur, all in good time. First things first, my house. I want to go home. My beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, the house Frank and I had bought as ambitious newlyweds, the place where I'd raised Kevin, where every corner held a memory. It had been violated by their scheming. The thought of Tiffany's perfectly manicured hands touching my things, of her redecorating my life to suit her vapid tastes, filled me with a cold fury. Arthur had already anticipated this. "I've had a locksmith on standby, Abby, and a security team. We'll change all the locks, do a sweep of the house to ensure they haven't left any listening devices or unpleasant surprises. You won't step foot in there until it's completely secured and cleansed of their presence." Cleansed. That was the right word. The process took a few days. I stayed at Arthur's comfortable guest suite, resting, regaining my strength, and most importantly, strategizing. Arthur's legal team was working overtime, preparing the lawsuits against Silver Willows, Ms. Perkins, and Mr. Sneed. The district attorney's office, prompted by the evidence of potential criminal fraud and elder abuse, had also opened an investigation. The wheels of justice, though sometimes slow, were beginning to grind. But my primary focus was on Kevin and Tiffany. The power of attorney was nullified, my assets frozen by court order pending a full review, effectively cutting off their access to my fortune. This, I knew, would be the first major blow to their carefully constructed lifestyle. Tiffany, in particular, had developed a taste for the finer things: designer clothes, expensive spa treatments, lavish vacations, all funded, I suspected, by a generous allowance from Kevin, which in turn was funded by my investments. That tap was about to run very, very dry. When I finally returned to my brownstone, it felt both familiar and alien. The locksmith had done his work. New, high-security locks gleamed on the doors. Arthur's security team had given it the all-clear. But the faint, lingering scent of Tiffany's expensive, cloying perfume still hung in the air, a ghostly reminder of her intrusion. I threw open all the windows, letting the fresh city air sweep through the rooms, banishing the last vestiges of her presence. The house was surprisingly tidy, almost sterile. Tiffany, it seemed, had already begun her redecorating by removing much of the clutter. My beloved books, Frank's collection of antique maps, the comfortable, slightly worn furniture that held so many memories. They had been replaced by sleek, minimalist pieces that screamed expensive, but possessed no soul. It was like walking into a high-end furniture showroom, not a home. My home. The anger that had been simmering within me flared anew. This wasn't just about money. It was about disrespect, about the erasure of my life, my history. Arthur, sensing my distress, placed a comforting hand on my arm. We can redecorate, Abby. Get rid of all this impersonal stuff, make it yours again. Oh, I intend to, Arthur, I said, my voice tight. But first, I need to access something they didn't manage to find. In the back of my cedar-lined linen closet, behind stacks of neatly folded tablecloths and Frank's mothballed dress uniforms, was a small, inconspicuous floor safe. Frank had installed it himself decades ago. Only he and I knew the combination. Inside, amongst old love letters and a few pieces of truly valuable family jewelry, not the costume pearls Tiffany was probably dreaming of, was another, more potent collection. A series of meticulously kept private journals. My journals. For years, I had been a keen observer of human nature, a habit honed by my profession. And after Tiffany had entered our lives, my observations had become more focused, more detailed. I had noted her little cruelties to Kevin when she thought no one was listening, her blatant flirtations with other men at social gatherings, her increasingly extravagant spending habits that far outstripped Kevin's actual income from his moderately successful, but by no means lucrative, art gallery. And then there were the photographs. About a year before my admission to Silver Willows, I had grown deeply concerned about Kevin. He seemed increasingly stressed, withdrawn, and always short of money, despite my generous financial assistance. I suspected Tiffany was bleeding him dry. On a hunch and with a heavy heart, I had done something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Not to spy on Kevin, but to understand the truth about Tiffany's lifestyle. The investigator's report had been illuminating. It turned out Tiffany had a penchant for very expensive hobbies. One of these hobbies was a young, devastatingly handsome tennis pro named Raoul, who apparently specialized in private lessons for wealthy, bored society women. Their lessons often took place in discreet boutique hotels during the afternoons when Kevin was at his gallery. The report included dates, times, locations, and a series of very clear, very compromising photographs. At the time, I had been heartbroken for Kevin, but I hadn't known what to do with the information. Revealing it would have shattered his illusions and potentially destroyed their marriage, something he clearly wasn't ready for. So I had filed the report away, a painful secret in my floor safe. Now, however, that report, those photographs, were no longer just a source of private sorrow. They were a weapon, a very powerful weapon. Arthur, I said, after retrieving the slim file from the safe, I believe it's time for Tiffany to have a little chat with her divorce lawyer. And I think this, I tapped the file, will make that conversation particularly productive for Kevin. Arthur's eyebrows shot up as he quickly scanned the first few pages of the investigator's report and glanced at the glossy photographs. A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. Abby, you never cease to amaze me. This is dynamite. Precisely, I said. Their prenuptial agreement, if I recall correctly, has a rather stringent infidelity clause. No spousal support, and a very disadvantageous division of assets for the guilty party. Indeed it does, Arthur confirmed, his eyes gleaming. Tiffany signed it rather blithely, I remember. She was so confident of Kevin's adoration, so sure of her own charms. Charms which, it appears, she was happy to bestow elsewhere, I remarked dryly. Now the question is, how do we deploy this information for maximum effect? We decided on a two-pronged approach. First, Arthur would, anonymously, leak a copy of the investigator's report, including a few of the more suggestive, but not overly explicit, to avoid accusations of distributing pornography, photographs, to a notorious city gossip columnist known for her sharp pen and her delight in society scandals. This would create a public relations nightmare for Tiffany, effectively shredding her carefully cultivated image as a devoted wife and socialite. Secondly, and more importantly, Arthur would present the full report in all its lurid detail directly to Kevin. Not as a threat from me, but as a concerned friend of the family who had recently come into possession of some disturbing information that Kevin had a right to know. He needs to see the truth, Abby, Arthur said gently. Not just about Tiffany, but about how thoroughly he's been manipulated. This might be the shock he needs to finally wake up. I wasn't so sure Kevin could wake up, not completely. He had always been too easily led, too eager to believe in pretty illusions. But the thought of Tiffany being stripped of her ill-gotten gains, of her being publicly humiliated after what she had done to me, brought a grim satisfaction. The gossip column hit the stands and the internet a week later. The headline was deliciously scandalous. Tennis, anyone? Society wife's afternoon matches raise eyebrows, and husband's suspicions. The article itself was cleverly worded, full of innuendo and suggestive details, but stopping just short of outright libel. It didn't name Tiffany directly, referring to her only as a certain platinum blonde benefactor of a struggling art gallery owner, but anyone who knew them, anyone in their social circle, would know exactly who it was about. The fallout was immediate. Tiffany's phone, I later learned, exploded with calls from horrified friends and gleeful enemies. Invitations to charity luncheons were suddenly misplaced. Her carefully constructed social standing began to crumble like a stale meringue. But the real drama unfolded when Arthur met with Kevin. He chose a neutral location, a quiet corner in his law firm's library. He laid out the investigator's report, the photographs stark and undeniable on the polished mahogany table. Kevin, according to Arthur, initially reacted with disbelief, then with a sputtering, defensive rage directed not at Tiffany, but at the messenger. "This is slander, lies, how dare you show me this filth?" Arthur remained calm. He simply pointed to the dates on the hotel receipts, the timestamps on the photographs, the meticulous documentation. "The evidence is rather compelling, Kevin," he said quietly. "I understand this is difficult, but you deserve to know the truth." Slowly, as the undeniable weight of the evidence pressed down on him, Kevin's anger began to falter, replaced by a dawning, sickening comprehension. The woman he had idealized, the woman for whom he had betrayed his own mother, was not who he thought she was. The urgent business that had so often called Tiffany away, the shopping trips that lasted for hours, the headaches that had kept her in separate rooms, it all clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. Arthur said Kevin sat there for a long time, staring at the photographs, his face ashen. Then, he did something Arthur hadn't expected. He began to weep. Not loud, theatrical sobs, but the silent, racking shudders of a man whose world has just imploded. "He's a weak man, Abby," Arthur told me later that evening over a glass of well-deserved brandy in my newly reclaimed living room, now furnished with a comfortable, if slightly mismatched, collection of pieces retrieved from storage. But perhaps not entirely without a conscience. The betrayal by Tiffany, on top of the realization of what he did to you. It might just be the rock bottom he needed to hit. I wasn't holding my breath for Kevin's redemption. My focus was on Tiffany. The public humiliation was just the beginning. Now came the legal evisceration. Armed with irrefutable proof of her adultery, Kevin, guided by Arthur, filed for divorce. The infidelity clause in their prenup was invoked. Tiffany, who had envisioned a life of effortless luxury, suddenly found herself facing the prospect of walking away with little more than her designer wardrobe, much of which, ironically, had been purchased with my money, funneled through Kevin. Her lawyers, of course, tried to fight it. They claimed the photographs were faked, the investigators' report biased. They even tried to argue that Kevin's neglect, due to his supposed preoccupation with my failing health, had driven her into the arms of another. It was a desperate, pathetic defense, and it crumbled quickly under the weight of Arthur's meticulous counterarguments and the sheer volume of evidence. The divorce proceedings were messy, acrimonious, and, for Tiffany, utterly devastating. The society pages, which had once breathlessly chronicled her every charity gala appearance, now feasted on the sordid details of her downfall. Raoul, the tennis pro, vanished from the scene as quickly as he had appeared, no doubt moving on to his next wealthy patron. During this time, I maintained a dignified public silence. I gave no interviews, issued no statements. My victory was best savored quietly. I focused on rebuilding my life, on reconnecting with the friends I had been isolated from, on slowly, carefully, allowing Claire back into my orbit after years of painful estrangement, caused by her misguided loyalty to her brother and her dislike of Tiffany. One thing Claire and I had always agreed on. The legal battles with Silver Willows and Mr. Sneed rumbled on in the background. They were complex, involving multiple plaintiffs. Arthur had discovered other families whose elderly relatives had suffered similar fates at Silver Willows, and would likely take years to resolve. But I had set the wheels in motion. The facility was under intense scrutiny, its reputation in tatters. Ms. Perkins had been quietly retired. Mr. Sneed was facing disbarment proceedings. Justice, in its slow, bureaucratic way, was being served. 6 months after I walked out of Silver Willows, Kevin's divorce from Tiffany was finalized. She was, as Arthur had gleefully predicted, stripped of any claim to my family's assets and received a laughably small settlement. She reportedly left the city, her tail between her legs, her dreams of grandeur reduced to tabloid fodder. Good riddance. Kevin, now truly alone and facing the consequences of his actions, was a changed man. Or, at least, a man forced to confront the wreckage he had made of his life. He was attending therapy, both individual and court-mandated, as part of a plea deal Arthur had negotiated in my case against him. I had agreed not to press for jail time on the condition that he received intensive treatment for what Arthur charitably called his lapses in judgment, and what I privately called his spineless greed. He came to see me one afternoon, unannounced. He stood on my doorstep, looking older, thinner, his eyes shadowed with a shame that, for the first time, seemed genuine. "Mom," he began, his voice hoarse. I don't know what to say. Sorry isn't enough. It will never be enough." I looked at him, my son, the boy I had loved beyond measure, the man who had betrayed me so profoundly. The anger was still there, a cold ember in my heart, but it was overlaid with a profound, weary sadness. "No, Kevin," I said quietly. "It isn't. But it's a start." I didn't invite him in, not yet. Some wounds, I knew, would take a lifetime to heal. Some betrayals could never be fully forgiven. But as I closed the door, I felt not hatred, but a strange, almost detached pity. He had lost everything. His wife, however odious she was, his access to easy money, and, most importantly, his mother's unconditional trust. He had traded it all for a fantasy peddled by a conniving woman, and now he was left with the bitter ashes of his choices. My own life, however, was blooming anew. I had my home back, my finances secure, my mind sharp and clear. I was reconnecting with old friends, making new ones. I even started volunteering at a local legal aid clinic, helping other seniors navigate the complexities of wills and estate planning, determined that no one else should suffer the fate Tiffany and Kevin had planned for me. The game, I realized, wasn't truly over. It had simply moved to a new board, and I, Abigail Harrington, was more than ready for the next play. The old fox had not only escaped the trap, but had also turned the tables on the hunters. And there was a certain delicious, undeniable justice in that. The best revenge, I'd always believed, wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simply living well, and independently, on your own damn terms. The quiet satisfaction of Tiffany's downfall and Kevin's forced reckoning was, I confess, considerable. But it was a sterile kind of victory. True healing, true reclamation, required more than just punishing the guilty. It required rebuilding what had been broken within myself, and, perhaps, cautiously exploring what, if anything, could be salvaged from the wreckage of my relationship with my son. My brownstone, once it was purged of Tiffany's minimalist monstrosities, and refilled with my own cherished belongings, retrieved from the expensive storage unit she'd relegated them to, began to feel like home again. Yet, it was different. I was different. The experience at Silver Willows had stripped away a certain naivete, a comfortable complacency I hadn't even realized I possessed. I was warier now, more attuned to the subtle currents of manipulation, more fiercely protective of my independence. Claire's return to my life was an unexpected balm. My daughter, a successful architect living in Chicago, had always been more clear-eyed about Tiffany than Kevin had. Their relationship had been strained for years, partly due to Tiffany's subtle machinations to isolate Kevin from his family, and partly due to my own reluctance to interfere too directly in my son's marriage, a reticence I now deeply regretted. When Claire heard what had happened, Arthur had called her immediately after my release. She was on the next flight to New York, her face a mixture of fury, guilt, and an overwhelming relief that I was safe. "Mom, I am so sorry," she'd whispered, her arms wrapped tightly around me, her sophisticated composure crumbling. "I should have seen it. I should have done more. Tiffany, I always knew she was a viper." "You couldn't have known this, darling," I reassured her, though a part of me had longed for her intervention earlier. None of us could have imagined they would go this far. Her presence was a comfort. We spent hours talking, bridging the distance that had grown between us. She helped me sort through the house, her practical, no-nonsense architect's mind making quick work of restoring order. She listened patiently as I recounted the horrors of Silver Willows, her eyes flashing with anger at the indignities I had suffered. And she was adamant that Kevin face the full legal consequences of his actions, though she understood my reluctance to see him incarcerated. "He needs to learn, Mom," she said firmly. "A harsh lesson, perhaps, but one he desperately needs. He can't just waltz back into your life expecting forgiveness after what he did." I knew she was right. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would be a long and arduous process, earned, not simply granted. The legal proceedings against Silver Willows and its network of enablers, including the odious Mr. Sneed, were gathering momentum. Arthur, in his element, was building an ironclad case. Other families, emboldened by my story, which, despite my desire for quiet, had inevitably leaked to the press, creating a minor sensation, began to come forward with their own tales of suspicious diagnoses, coerced signatures, and sudden, inexplicable declines in their loved one's health after admission to similar facilities. It became clear that what had happened to me was not an isolated incident, but part of a more insidious pattern of elder exploitation, preying on the vulnerabilities of age and the anxieties of families. My involvement with the legal aid clinic became more than just a way to pass the time. It became a mission. I met women and men whose stories mirrored my own in heartbreaking ways. Children eager to get their hands on inheritances, unscrupulous guardians, isolating seniors from their support networks, predatory financial advisors pushing unsuitable investments. My 40 years at the IRS, deciphering complex financial schemes, suddenly felt like a training ground for this new battle. I helped them understand their rights, connected them with reputable lawyers like Arthur, and taught them how to spot the red flags of financial abuse. There was a fierce satisfaction in empowering others, in turning my own painful experience into a tool for good. Kevin, meanwhile, was navigating the bewildering landscape of court-mandated therapy and a life suddenly devoid of Tiffany's manipulative presence and my financial safety net. He had to sell his struggling art gallery. It turned out Tiffany's extravagant spending had pushed it to the brink of bankruptcy long before my funds were cut off. He moved into a small rented apartment, a stark contrast to the luxurious lifestyle he had become accustomed to. He called me occasionally, his voice tentative, filled with a humility I hadn't heard from him since he was a boy who'd broken a neighbor's window with a stray baseball. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make excuses. He just talked. About his therapy sessions. About the difficulty of finding a new job at his age with his now tarnished reputation. About the crushing weight of his guilt. I listened, mostly in silence. I offered no easy absolution, no comforting platitudes. I was polite, distant, but I didn't hang up. A part of me, the mother part, still ached for the lost boy within the broken man. But another part, the part forged in the crucible of silver willows, remained wary, watchful. Trust, once shattered, is a mosaic pieced together with infinite patience, and many shards remain missing. One Saturday, about a year after my escape, Kevin asked if he could come over for coffee. Not to ask for anything, he quickly added, just to talk, in person. I hesitated. My house, my sanctuary, still felt tender, vulnerable to his presence. But Claire, who happened to be visiting that weekend, surprised me by saying, "Let him come, Mom. You don't have to forgive him. But maybe you both need to hear what the other has to say, without lawyers present." So, he came. He looked older, the lines of stress etched deeper around his eyes. He brought a small, humble bouquet of yellow roses, my actual favorites. A peace offering, I supposed, or perhaps a sign that he was finally paying attention. We sat in my sunny breakfast nook, the one Tiffany had planned to demolish to expand the kitchen into a chef's paradise. The silence was thick with unspoken words, with years of hurt and misunderstanding. Finally he spoke, his voice low, unsteady. "Mom, I know nothing I can say will ever make up for what I did. For the fear, the betrayal. I was a fool. A greedy, spineless fool, manipulated by Tiffany, yes, but ultimately, the choices were mine. I chose to believe her lies. I chose to discard you." His use of the word discard was like a fresh stab to the heart, yet it was also brutally true. "Why, Kevin?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. "Why would you do that to your own mother?" Was my money, my house, really worth that much to you? He looked down at his hands, twisting a paper napkin into shreds. It wasn't. It wasn't just the money, Mom. Though, God help me, that was part of it. Tiffany. She had this way of making me feel inadequate. Like I wasn't providing enough, wasn't successful enough. She kept saying we needed more, deserved more. And your money. It seemed like the easy solution. She convinced me that you were losing it. That you'd be happier, safer, in a place like Silver Willows. That it was the loving thing to do. He laughed, a harsh, self-deprecating sound. Loving. I locked my own mother away, drugged her, tried to steal her inheritance, and called it love. He looked up then, his eyes filled with a raw, unfiltered pain. I was weak, Mom, and I was a coward. I let her convince me that your independence was a burden, your sharp mind a threat to her plans. And I went along with it. Because it was easier than standing up to her. Easier than being the man I should have been. His confession, stripped of all artifice, all excuses, was disarming. It didn't excuse his actions, not by a long shot. But it offered a glimpse into the pathetic motivations behind them. He hadn't been a monster, not in the way Tiffany was. He had been a weak, easily influenced man, desperate for the approval of a woman who despised him, and willing to sacrifice his own mother on the altar of that desperation. And now? I asked quietly. Now that Tiffany is gone, now that the easy solution has evaporated. Now, he said, his voice barely a whisper, I'm trying to figure out who I am without her, without your money. It's terrifying. And humbling. I'm working a part-time job at a hardware store, Mom. Me. Kevin Harrington, a master of fine arts, stacking shelves. It's a long way from the gallery openings and the society benefits Tiffany dragged me to. There was no self-pity in his voice, only a stark acknowledgement of his new reality. For the first time in a very long time, I felt a flicker of something other than anger or sadness towards him. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was, perhaps, the faintest stirring of a grudging respect for his brutal honesty. We talked for over an hour that day. About his therapy, about his struggles to find meaningful work, about the loneliness of his small apartment. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't try to justify his past actions. He simply shared his brokenness. When he left, I didn't offer him false hope. I didn't say, "It's okay, son, all is forgiven," because it wasn't okay. And it wasn't all forgiven. But as I watched him walk down the steps of my brownstone, a solitary, somewhat stooped figure, I realized that the path to any kind of future relationship, however tenuous, would have to be built not on forgetting the past, but on courageously confronting its truths, however ugly they might be. He had taken a small, hesitant step on that path. Whether he had the strength to continue, only time would tell. My own path, however, was becoming clearer. The lawsuits against Silver Willows were progressing. Arthur was confident of a significant settlement, not just for me, but for the other families who had joined the class action. More importantly, the case was forcing a much-needed public conversation about elder abuse and the regulation of assisted living facilities. My story, once a source of private shame and terror, was becoming a catalyst for change. I also found an unexpected joy in my volunteer work. The women I met at the legal aid clinic, each with her own story of struggle and resilience, inspired me. I helped them set up budgets, understand their pension plans, protect themselves from scams. I saw the relief in their eyes when they realized they weren't alone, that they had options, that they could reclaim control of their lives. It was, in a way, a reflection of my own journey. One of the women I mentored, a feisty 70-year-old named Maria, who had been tricked out of her life savings by a predatory financial advisor, decided to fight back. With Arthur's pro bono help, and the evidence I helped her gather, she not only recovered a significant portion of her money, but also saw the con artist prosecuted and jailed. Maria, once a timid, defeated woman, now radiated a newfound confidence. She started a small support group for other victims of financial fraud, becoming a fierce advocate in her community. Her transformation was a powerful reminder that it's never too late to find your voice, to fight for your dignity. It was a lesson I had learned in the harshest of ways, but one I was now determined to share. Life settled into a new rhythm. My days were filled with purpose. I had my friends, my daughter, our bond stronger than ever, my volunteer work, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had faced down my demons and emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably whole. The ghost scent of silver willows still occasionally wafted through my nightmares, but it no longer held the power to terrify me. It was just a reminder of a battle fought and won. Then, about 18 months after my escape, Arthur called with news that sent a jolt through my carefully reconstructed peace. Tiffany was back in town, and she was apparently trying to reconnect with Kevin. "She's broke, Abby," Arthur said, his voice grim. "The settlement was minimal, and she clearly burned through it quickly. She's been seen around Kevin's apartment building. One of my contacts saw her trying to talk her way past the doorman. Looks like she's realized that even a humbled Kevin is a better prospect than no prospect at all." A cold dread settled in my stomach. Kevin, despite everything, was still vulnerable. He was lonely, struggling. Tiffany was a master manipulator. Could she, even now, worm her way back into his life, undoing all the painful progress he had made? The thought was unbearable. The old fox in me, the one that had outwitted them at Silver Willows, felt a familiar stirring. Tiffany hadn't learned her lesson. It seemed I would have to teach her another one, and this time there would be no mercy. The game, it appeared, was not quite over after all. The news of Tiffany's reappearance was like a discordant note in the carefully reharmonized symphony of my life. For 1.5 years, I had focused on rebuilding, on healing, on finding a new sense of purpose. The thought of her slithering back, attempting to ensnare Kevin once more, filled me with a potent cocktail of anger and a grim, weary determination. Some pests, it seemed, required more than one swat. I immediately called Claire. "She's back," I said without preamble. "Tiffany." Claire's voice sharpened with instant understanding and shared disdain. "What does she want? More money? Has she no shame?" "Apparently not," I replied dryly. "Arthur says she's been sniffing around Kevin's apartment. He's worried Kevin might be vulnerable." "He is vulnerable, Mom," Claire said, her tone laced with a protective frustration towards her brother. "He's always been a sucker for a pretty face and a sob story, especially hers. We can't let her get her claws into him again." We agreed that I needed to speak to Kevin, to warn him, though I harbored few illusions about my ability to sway him if Tiffany truly set her mind to it. My relationship with him was still fragile, a delicate truce rather than a full reconciliation. He visited occasionally, we had stilted but civil conversations, but the chasm of his betrayal remained. He was trying, I knew that. He was sober, holding down his job at the hardware store, attending his therapy sessions. But the deep-seated insecurities that Tiffany had so expertly exploited were still there, lurking beneath the surface. I invited him for dinner, a rare occurrence. I cooked his childhood favorite, pot roast with roasted vegetables, a meal that spoke of a simpler, happier time, before Tiffany's shadow had fallen across our family. He arrived looking more put together than he had in months, a faint spark of his old self in his eyes. But as we sat down to eat, I saw the familiar signs of anxiety, The way he avoided my gaze, the nervous tapping of his fingers on the table. "Kevin," I began gently, after we'd exchanged a few pleasantries about his work and my volunteer activities. "Arthur mentioned, he said Tiffany has been seen in the city, near your apartment." His fork clattered onto his plate. The color drained from his face. How did he know?" "Arthur has his ways, dear," I said, not unkindly. "The question is, have you seen her? Has she contacted you?" He hesitated, then nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. She called, a few times, left messages, said she wanted to talk. To apologize. Apologize? I raised an eyebrow. "Tiffany, apologizing, that's a new one." "She said she's changed, Mom," Kevin said, his voice low, almost pleading. "That she made terrible mistakes, that she misses me, that she's lonely." I felt a familiar weariness wash over me. He was falling for it. The damsel in distress act, one of Tiffany's specialties. "Kevin," I said, my voice firm but calm. "Do you honestly believe that? After everything she did? To you? To me?" "I know, Mom, I know," he said, looking miserable. "But she sounded so desperate. And she said she still loves me." I sighed. "Kevin, Tiffany loves only one person, Tiffany. And perhaps Tiffany's access to money. Yours, mine, anyone's. She's broke, isn't she? That's why she's back. Not because she loves you, but because she needs you. Or rather, she needs what she thinks you can still provide." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "That's not fair, Mom. Maybe she really has changed. People can change." "Some people can, Kevin," I conceded. "But manipulative, narcissistic predators like Tiffany rarely do. They simply adapt their tactics. She sees you making progress, getting your life back on track, however slowly. She sees me, still alive and well, my finances intact. Perhaps she thinks she can play us against each other again, find a new way to bleed us dry." "She wouldn't," he began, but his voice lacked conviction. "Wouldn't she?" I pressed. "Remember Silver Willows, Kevin. Remember what she convinced you to do. Remember the lies, the deceit. Has she ever taken responsibility for her actions? Or has it always been someone else's fault?" He was silent, staring down at his uneaten pot roast. The memory of Silver Willows, I knew, was still a raw wound for him, a source of profound shame. "I'm not telling you what to do, Kevin," I said, softening my tone slightly. "You're a grown man. You have to make your own decisions. But I am asking you to open your eyes. To see her for who she truly is, not who you wish her to be. And to remember the price we both paid for your gullibility." He left soon after, the pot roast barely touched. I didn't know if my words had reached him. He was like a moth drawn to a flame, and Tiffany was a particularly dazzling, dangerous fire. A few days later, Arthur called with an update. "She's escalating, Abby." Tiffany managed to bump into Kevin outside his apartment building. Apparently, there was a tearful scene. "She's good, I'll give her that." Played the victim card masterfully. "And Kevin?" I asked, my heart sinking. "He's wavering," Arthur said grimly. "He told her he needed time to think. Which, in Kevin's case, usually means he's about to do something foolish." I knew then that I couldn't just stand by and watch Tiffany destroy him again, and potentially drag me back into her toxic orbit. My previous victory had been about reclaiming my own life. This new battle was about protecting my son from himself, and from her. And it required a different strategy. The photographs. The ones from the investigator's report. The ones detailing Tiffany's affair with Raoul, the tennis pro. I had used them to initiate Kevin's divorce, to ensure Tiffany got her financial comeuppance. but I hadn't released them publicly beyond what the gossip columnist had insinuated. I had held back, partly out of a residual desire to protect Kevin from further humiliation, partly because I hadn't wanted to stoop to Tiffany's level of public mudslinging. But Tiffany had just changed the rules of engagement, again. "Arthur," I said, a new, colder resolve hardening my voice. "Remember those rather explicit photographs of Tiffany and her sporty young friend?" "Vividly, Abby," he replied, a note of anticipation in his voice. "I think it's time they saw the light of day, not in some sleazy tabloid, but in a way that will have maximum professional and social impact on Ms. Davis." Arthur was silent for a moment, then chuckled. "You have a plan, don't you, Abby? You always have a plan." "Indeed I do," I said. "Tiffany, I believe, has been trying to re-establish herself in the city, perhaps looking for a new patron. She fancies herself a PR guru, a brand consultant. I think it's time her own brand received a bit of a re-evaluation. My plan was simple, yet, I hoped, devastatingly effective." Through a series of discreet, anonymous channels, Arthur had a particular talent for such things. We would ensure that the full set of photographs, along with a concise, fact-based summary of Tiffany's adulterous behavior and her role in the Silver Willows scandal, carefully omitting any details that would cast Kevin in too harsh a light, focusing instead on her manipulation, reached certain influential people. Specifically, the board members of the charitable organizations Tiffany was desperately trying to rejoin, to regain her social standing. The editors of the city's most respected business and society magazines, the ones she relied on for favorable mentions. A few select, very wealthy and very married, older gentlemen, whom Tiffany had reportedly been cultivating. And as a final touch, Raoul's current employer, the very exclusive country club where he taught tennis to other wealthy bored wives. A little anonymous tip about his unprofessional conduct might just cramp his style. It was a scorched earth policy, I knew. But Tiffany had declared war, and I was not about to lose this battle. The information was disseminated with surgical precision. No public fanfare, no direct accusations from me. Just the quiet, insidious spread of damaging truth. The effect was almost immediate. Tiffany's attempts to re-enter society came to a screeching halt. Doors that had once been open to her were suddenly, firmly closed. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Potential clients for her consulting business vanished. Even her most tenuous social connections began to distance themselves. She was becoming a pariah. Kevin called me about a week later, his voice a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Mom, have you seen the papers? The online gossip sites? They're saying terrible things about Tiffany. About an affair. About Silver Willows." "I've heard some rumors, dear," I said innocently. "People do love to talk, don't they? But it's so detailed, Mom. So specific. Where did they get this information?" He sounded genuinely bewildered. "Truth has a way of surfacing, Kevin," I said gently. "Especially when someone has as many skeletons in her closet as Tiffany does." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, his voice barely audible, "She came to see me yesterday, crying. Said her life was ruined, that everyone had turned against her. She begged me to take her back. Said I was the only one who ever truly understood her." My heart tightened. Here it was, the moment of truth. "And what did you say, Kevin?" I asked, holding my breath. He took a deep, shaky breath. I told her I couldn't, Mom. I told her I finally saw her for who she is, a liar, a user, someone who destroys everything she touches." He paused, then added, with a strength I hadn't heard in his voice in years, "I told her to get out of my life, and never come back." A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. He had done it. He had finally found the strength to break free from her toxic influence. "I'm proud of you, Kevin," I said, my voice thick with emotion. And for the first time in a very long time, I truly meant it. Tiffany, her reputation in tatters, her financial prospects nil, finally gave up. She left New York, reportedly moving back to her hometown in the Midwest to live with her long-suffering mother. I felt no triumph, only a quiet sense of closure. The Tiffany chapter of our lives was, at long last, truly over. With Tiffany gone, Kevin began to slowly, painstakingly, rebuild his life. He continued with his therapy. He found a more fulfilling, albeit still modest, job, teaching art classes at a community center. He started volunteering at a soup kitchen. He was, for the first time, living a life of quiet integrity, a life not defined by material possessions or the approval of others. Our relationship, too, began to heal, though the scars remained. We started having regular Sunday dinners together. We talked, really talked, about the past, about our hopes for the future. The shadow of Silver Willows still lingered, but it no longer defined us. We were finding a new way to be mother and son, a way based on honesty and a hard-won, mutual respect. The class action lawsuit against Silver Willows and its affiliates eventually settled out of court for a substantial sum. Much of my share, and the shares of the other families, went into establishing a foundation, the Abigail Harrington Foundation for Elder Justice. Its mission was simple: to provide legal aid, advocacy, and education to protect seniors from financial exploitation and institutional abuse. My work at the Legal Aid Clinic had shown me the desperate need for such an organization. Now, I had the resources to make a real difference on a larger scale. Claire became a vital part of the foundation, lending her sharp legal mind and organizational skills to its board. She and Kevin, too, began to mend their fractured relationship, united by a shared relief that Tiffany was gone, and a common purpose in supporting my new venture. Life, I discovered, was full of unexpected second acts. At 77, I was busier, more engaged, more fulfilled than I had been in decades. I had faced betrayal and imprisonment, and I had emerged not just a survivor, but a warrior. I had reclaimed not only my assets and my freedom, but also my voice and my purpose. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet, I would sit in my comfortable armchair, sipping a cup of herbal tea, and reflect on the improbable journey of the past few years. The scent of Silver Willows no longer haunted my dreams. It had been replaced by the clean, invigorating aroma of a life lived on my own terms. A life dedicated to ensuring that no one else would have to endure what I had faced. The old fox had not only escaped the trap, she had turned the tables, brought the hunters to justice, and then, with a wisdom born of pain and resilience, had set about making the forest a safer place for everyone. And that, I thought with a quiet smile, was a far greater treasure than any baubles Tiffany could have ever dreamed of finding in my safe deposit box. My legacy would not be one of victimhood, but of strength, justice, and an unwavering belief in the power of one determined woman to change the world, one meticulously planned move at a time. As I look back on it all, the twists and turns, the betrayals and the unexpected alliances, the lesson that resonates most profoundly is this: never underestimate the quiet ones. Never assume that age or apparent frailty equates to weakness. Within the most unassuming exterior can reside a mind as sharp as any corporate raider's, a will as indomitable as any general's. And when that quiet strength is finally unleashed, when the meticulously laid plans are finally set in motion, the results can be truly spectacular. If this tale of an old fox outsmarting the wolves has captured your imagination, if you believe in the power of resilience and the sweet taste of long overdue justice, then you're in exactly the right place. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because our archives are filled with stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And trust me, the narratives we have lined up for the coming weeks are even more deliciously complex. You won't want to miss a single satisfying moment. Until next time, remember to read the fine print, trust your instincts, and never, ever let them see you sweat. The months following Tiffany's ignominious departure and Kevin's tentative steps towards self-reclamation settled into a rhythm that was, for me, surprisingly fulfilling. The Abigail Harrington Foundation for Elder Justice was no longer just an idea. It was a burgeoning reality, a hive of activity that consumed my days and energized my spirit in a way I hadn't felt since my early crusading years at the IRS. Arthur Jenkins, with his characteristic blend of legal acumen and benevolent gruffness, had helped me navigate the complexities of establishing a nonprofit. We secured a small, unpretentious office space in a downtown building, worlds away from the opulent sterility of Silver Willows. Claire, despite her demanding architectural career in Chicago, flew in regularly for board meetings, her sharp intellect and pragmatic approach proving invaluable. She designed our modest office space, transforming it into a welcoming, efficient environment with clever use of light and color. It was a quiet joy to work alongside her, to see her professional brilliance applied to a cause that had become so deeply personal to me. Our clientele at the foundation was a poignant tapestry of human vulnerability and resilience. We saw seniors who had been systematically drained of their savings by predatory caregivers, others entangled in complex property disputes with grasping relatives, and many who were simply overwhelmed by bureaucratic red tape when trying to access benefits they were entitled to. Each case was a fresh reminder of why this work was so vital. One particularly memorable case involved a gentleman named Mr. Elijah Washington, a retired jazz musician in his late 80s, who was on the verge of being evicted from his rent-controlled apartment of 50 years. His new landlord, a slick young developer who had recently bought the building, was employing every dirty trick in the book to force out the long-term, low-rent tenants to make way for luxury condos. Mr. Washington, frail and nearly blind, was their primary target. He had come to us in despair, clutching a sheaf of confusing legal notices. My old IRS instincts for sniffing out financial chicanery went into overdrive. With the help of a tenacious young pro bono lawyer Arthur had recruited, we delved into the developer's Byzantine corporate structure. We discovered a pattern of predatory acquisitions, questionable financing, and a history of harassing elderly tenants. It was Silver Willows all over again, just in a different guise. The fight was long and arduous. The developer had deep pockets and a team of aggressive lawyers. But we had something he didn't: the truth, and a network of community activists and local journalists whom Claire, with her savvy understanding of modern media, helped us mobilize. We organized peaceful protests outside the developer's gleaming downtown office. We fed information to investigative reporters. We filed countersuits, challenging every eviction notice, every fabricated claim of lease violations. Mr. Washington, initially terrified and defeated, found a new spark. He would sit in our office, frail but resolute, recounting his story to anyone who would listen, his voice, though raspy with age, still carrying the cadence of his musical soul. He became the human face of our fight. The turning point came when we unearthed evidence that the developer had used falsified documents to secure a crucial zoning variance for his planned condo conversion. It was a complex piece of financial forensics, a trail deliberately obscured through shell corporations and offshore accounts. But 40 years of untangling the Gordian knots of tax evasion had made me something of an expert in following the money, no matter how convoluted the path. Presented with irrefutable proof of fraud, the developer's legal team crumbled. The city revoked his permits. Mr. Washington and the other remaining tenants were safe. The victory was sweet, not just for the legal precedent it set, but for the look of profound, tearful gratitude on Mr. Washington's face when we told him he could stay in his home. "You're an angel, Mrs. Harrington," he'd said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "A guardian angel in a sensible tweed suit." "Not an angel, Mr. Washington," I'd replied with a smile. "Just a stubborn old woman who hates bullies." This work, this constant battle against injustice, was invigorating. It filled the void left by Frank's passing, the emptiness created by Kevin's betrayal. It gave my days a structure, a purpose, that went beyond simply managing my own affairs. I was no longer just Abigail Harrington, the wealthy widow, or Abigail Harrington, the wronged mother. I was Abigail Harrington, advocate, strategist, a force to be reckoned with. Kevin, to his credit, continued on his own path of quiet atonement. He never asked for financial help, though I knew he was struggling. He found a quiet satisfaction in his art classes, particularly in working with underprivileged children. He'd occasionally share stories about his students, their raw talent, their unfiltered observations about the world. There was a humility in him now, a gentleness that had been absent for years, buried beneath layers of insecurity and Tiffany's corrosive influence. Our Sunday dinners became a regular ritual. The conversation was still sometimes stilted, the ghosts of the past hovering in the corners of the room, but we were talking. He would ask about the foundation, listening with genuine interest to my stories about Mr. Washington or Maria from the legal aid clinic. I, in turn, would inquire about his classes, his students. We were rebuilding, one careful, hesitant brick at a time. He never mentioned Tiffany. It was as if a curtain had been drawn across that chapter of his life. I didn't press him. Some doors are best left closed. Claire, during her visits, observed our evolving dynamic with a mixture of cautious optimism and her usual clear-eyed pragmatism. "He seems different, Mom," she conceded after one particularly peaceful Sunday dinner. "Less defensive, more present." "He's trying, Claire," I said. "That's all we can ask for right now." "Just don't let him take advantage of your good nature again," she warned, her protective instincts still strong. "Don't worry, darling," I assured her with a wry smile. "This old fox has learned a few new tricks, and she hasn't forgotten the old ones." The lawsuit against Silver Willows finally reached a critical juncture. Faced with a mountain of evidence, my meticulous logs, Arthur's discovery of the phantom Dr. Anderson, testimonies from other families, and the looming threat of a very public, very damaging trial, their parent company, a large healthcare conglomerate that had clearly underestimated the hornet's nest they'd stirred, decided to cut their losses. They offered a substantial settlement, not just to me, but to all the families involved in the class action. It included significant financial compensation, a public apology, carefully worded, of course, to avoid admitting outright criminal guilt, and, most importantly, a commitment to implement sweeping reforms in their admission procedures, staff training, and resident oversight across all their facilities. Mr. Sneed, the shifty lawyer, had already been disbarred, his career in ruins. Miss Perkins had vanished into early retirement, her reputation irreparably damaged. It wasn't a perfect victory. No amount of money could fully compensate for the trauma, the fear, the stolen time. But it was a significant one. It sent a clear message to the elder care industry: you will be held accountable. A portion of my settlement went directly into the foundation's endowment, ensuring its future and expanding its reach. We were able to hire more staff, take on more complex cases, and launch a public awareness campaign about the signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Abigail Harrington, the woman they had tried to silence and fleece, was now funding the very organization dedicated to preventing others from suffering the same fate. The irony was not lost on me, and it was deeply, profoundly satisfying. One afternoon, Kevin surprised me by showing up at the foundation's office. He looked nervous, out of place amidst the bustling activity of lawyers, paralegals, and volunteers. "Mom," he said, twisting the brim of an old baseball cap in his hands. I was wondering. Is there anything at all, I could do to help here? I'm not a lawyer, I know. But I'm good with my hands. I can paint, fix things, or just make coffee, anything. I looked at him, really looked at him. The desperation was gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet sincerity. The hardware store job was clearly not fulfilling his creative spirit, nor was it likely paying enough for him to feel truly independent. This offer, I sensed, was not about ingratiating himself, but about a genuine desire to contribute, to find some measure of redemption. "Well, Kevin," I said, after a moment's thought, "our reception area could use a fresh coat of paint. And those shelves in the resource library are a bit wobbly, if you're serious." A slow smile spread across his face, the first truly unburdened smile I'd seen from him in years. "I'm serious, Mom, very serious." And so, Kevin Harrington, MFA, former art gallery owner, began his volunteer work at the Abigail Harrington Foundation for Elder Justice. He started by painting walls and fixing shelves, but soon his artistic talents found other outlets. He designed new brochures for us, created visually appealing infographics to explain complex legal rights, and even started an informal art therapy group for some of our more traumatized clients, a space where they could express their pain and begin to heal through creativity. He was quiet, diligent, and unfailingly respectful to everyone. He never asked for praise, never drew attention to himself. He just did the work. Claire was initially skeptical. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" she'd asked during one of her visits, watching Kevin patiently showing an elderly woman how to mix watercolors. "Isn't it a bit convenient, him working for your foundation?" "Perhaps, darling," I replied. "But people deserve a chance to make amends, don't they? Not just with words, but with actions. And his actions so far speak volumes." Slowly, tentatively, the ice between brother and sister also began to thaw. Claire, seeing Kevin's genuine commitment, his quiet efforts to contribute, started to include him in her conversations, to ask his opinion on design elements for the foundation's new outreach materials. They were a long way from their childhood closeness, but it was a beginning. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. The son who had tried to lock me away was now helping me build an organization dedicated to freeing others. The irony was rich, but it was also, in its own complicated way, hopeful. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, as I was reviewing a particularly complex case file involving a sophisticated online scam targeting seniors, my assistant, a bright young woman named Sarah, buzzed me. "Mrs. Harrington, there's a Miss Tiffany Devereaux here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists it's urgent." Tiffany. The name alone sent a jolt of unwelcome adrenaline through me. What could that creature possibly want now? Hadn't she learned her lesson? Or was this another desperate gambit, another attempt to claw her way back into a life of luxury she no longer deserved? A part of me wanted to tell Sarah to send her packing. But another part, the old, battle-hardened fox, was intrigued. What new game was Tiffany playing? And what, I wondered with a sudden cold premonition, did her urgent business have to do with me or with Kevin? Send her in, Sarah, I said, my voice calm, betraying none of the sudden tension coiling in my gut. Let's see what Ms. Devereaux has to say for herself. The door opened and Tiffany swept in, or rather, she attempted to sweep. The confident, imperious glide of the society queen had been replaced by something diminished. She was still impeccably dressed, of course. Old habits die hard, especially when those habits involve expensive designer labels. But there was a brittleness about her, a faint desperation in her eyes that even her expertly applied makeup couldn't quite conceal. The past 2 years had clearly not been kind to her. Good. Abigail, she began, her voice a carefully modulated purr that didn't quite mask the underlying tremor. So good to see you looking so well. Tiffany, I replied, my tone cool, polite. I did not invite her to sit. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? She clasped her hands together, a theatrical gesture of distress. Abigail, I've come to you because I don't know where else to turn. I've made terrible mistakes. I know that. And I've paid for them. Believe me, I've paid. I merely raised an eyebrow, waiting. It's about Kevin, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I'm worried about him, Abigail. Terribly worried. This was new. Tiffany, worried about someone other than herself. Highly improbable. Oh, I said. And what precisely are your concerns, Tiffany? She leaned forward, her eyes wide with feigned sincerity. He's not himself, Abigail. He's become withdrawn, depressed. He's associating with unsuitable people. I fear he's heading for another breakdown. Or worse. Unsuitable people? Was she referring to his art students from the community center? Or perhaps his colleagues at the soup kitchen? And you believe this is my concern because, I prompted, my patience wearing thin. Because you're his mother, she exclaimed, as if stating the obvious. And because despite everything, I still care for him. Deeply. And I know, in his heart, he still cares for me. We made a terrible mess of things, Abigail, I admit that. But perhaps it's not too late for us, for him. If we could just talk. If you could help me, help him. Ah, there it was. The angle. She wasn't just trying to get back with Kevin. She was trying to use me as her unwitting accomplice. She was hoping to appeal to my maternal instincts, to convince me that she was the key to Kevin's salvation. The audacity of it was almost breathtaking. I looked at her, this beautifully packaged vessel of malice and manipulation, and I felt not anger, but a profound, almost clinical, contempt. She hadn't learned a thing. She still saw everyone around her as pawns in her own selfish game. Tiffany, I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm that I knew, from past experience, could be far more unsettling than any raised tone. Let me be perfectly clear. Kevin is doing remarkably well without your caring influence. He is rebuilding his life, slowly but surely, with integrity and humility, qualities you wouldn't recognize if they served you breakfast in bed. Her carefully composed expression faltered. A flicker of anger, raw and undisguised, flashed in her eyes. As for your supposed concern for his well-being, I continued, my gaze unwavering, I find it unconvincing. The only person Tiffany Devereaux has ever truly cared about is Tiffany Devereaux. And the only thing you're worried about right now is your own dwindling bank account and your vanished social standing. How dare you? She hissed, her voice losing its purr, revealing the shrew beneath. Oh, I dare, Tiffany, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I dare because I know exactly who and what you are. You came here today not out of concern for Kevin, but because you're desperate. You see him volunteering at my foundation. You see me, still very much in control of my faculties and my finances. And you thought you could play the repentant Magdalene, worm your way back in, and perhaps even convince me to intercede on your behalf with Kevin. Or better yet, convince me that he needs you to save him from himself. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the sight of her composure rapidly disintegrating. Let me save you any further effort, Tiffany. It won't work. Kevin has finally seen you for the parasite you are. And as for me, I made a mistake once, underestimating you. I assure you, it's not a mistake I intend to repeat. I paused, then delivered the coup de grace. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do. Work that involves helping people who have been genuinely wronged, not coddling manipulative narcissists who believe the world owes them a living. Sarah will show you out. Tiffany stared at me, her face a mask of fury and thwarted ambition. For a moment, I thought she might actually lunge across the desk. But then, with a visible effort, she pulled herself together, her features settling back into a semblance of haughty disdain. You'll regret this, Abigail, she spat. You and your pathetic, broken son. You'll both regret it. I doubt it, Tiffany, I said sweetly. But I do wish you all the best in your future endeavors. I hear the Midwest is lovely this time of year. She turned on her heel and stormed out, nearly colliding with Sarah in the doorway. When she was gone, I let out a long, slow breath. It was done. That chapter, I felt with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, was well and truly closed. Tiffany Devereaux would not be bothering us again. She had played her last card, and it had been a spectacularly bad one. The old fox, it seemed, still had a few teeth left, and she wasn't afraid to use them. Tiffany's ill-conceived attempt to re-enter our lives was not just a nuisance. It was an insult to the hard-won peace Kevin and I were trying to build. My response was swift and surgical. The carefully curated package of information, detailing Tiffany's extracurricular activities with Raoul the tennis pro, found its way to the inboxes and mailboxes of a select few. The remaining society die-in Tiffany was desperately trying to impress, the board members of charities she hoped would rehabilitate her image, and most deliciously, to the chairman of the exclusive country club where Raoul plied his trade. The ensuing implosion of Tiffany's remaining social standing was as quiet as it was devastating. No public scandal this time. Just the cold, silent closing of doors and the polite, unreturned phone calls that signaled her definitive exile from the world she so craved. Kevin, to his credit, witnessed this final act of Tiffany's self-destruction with a newfound clarity, finally understanding the depth of her narcissism and the shallowness of her affections. It was a painful but necessary catharsis for him, severing the last lingering threads of a toxic attachment. With Tiffany truly gone, the path towards a genuine, albeit forever altered, relationship between my son and me opened further. We continued our Sunday dinners, our conversations growing easier, filled less with the ghosts of the past, and more with the quiet progress of the present. The foundation flourished, a testament to the idea that even the deepest betrayals can be transformed into a force for good. I, Abigail Harrington, had faced the wolves and not only survived but had emerged stronger, my voice amplified, my purpose clear. The old fox hadn't just reclaimed her den. She had redrawn the map of the entire forest, ensuring it was a safer, more just place for all who roamed within it.